Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar entitled The New Europass European Update on Digitally Signed Credentials. Thank you all very much for joining. I understand this is a slightly different name than some of you were told when I sent the invitation out to you. But this title was suggested by Rob and is obviously much better and much clearer about what we're actually discussing today. So please don't be confused. What we will cover remains exactly the same. So my name is Lambros Pardale. I'm the UK National Europass Coordinator, a contract which is housed within UK NARIC, which you may also be familiar with. Just pass over to Rob to introduce himself quickly as well. Rob?
Yeah, so
okay.
First lesson, unmute microphone.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Lambros. It's great to see people joining us. We're going to record this, I think, Lambros.
Yes, it is recording as we speak. So
your name, your words will be taken in vain later on. I'm Rob Ward. I was for many years the director of the Centre for Recording Achievement. The CRA designed and led the trial process for the HERE, which has subsequently become the UK iteration of the diploma supplement. We wrote the guidance materials for the HERE, and we're still interested in that work and increasingly interested in it in a global context, given developments in the USA with the comprehensive learner record, with developments in Australia and New Zealand in terms of the eQuals framework, and also with interest in digital verification of documents for students returning to their home countries, most notably in the recent context, which Lambros and I are tussling over, the Chinese system. So that's my background. I'm really interested in talking about what this might be going forward with, how the HERE fits into it, and also recognizing the different starting points people come with. And just to reiterate, please, colleagues, as we go along, given that the microphones will be muted, put your comments into the chat box, which is on the top left of your screen, all being well, and we will monitor those and pick those up towards the end as the basis for discussion. And I'll pass back to Lambros. Thanks, Lambros.
Thank you, Rob. Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Europass in its current form, it's a portfolio of 5 documents which helps individuals take advantage of work and study opportunities across Europe and beyond. The most well-known of which is a standardized CV. However, we are here to discuss how this is all changing, with particular reference to digitally signed credentials. So the overall aims of the webinar are to provide an update to UK higher education stakeholders on the new Europass platform. Obviously with a focus on digitally signed credentials and how this framework within the new Europass will operate. And also we'll have a look at how this fits into a UK context, how you can be involved in the development of the new platform, and of course our main goal with anything like this is to understand how this will work towards students being more actively engaged with their learner records. However, this is packaged in a European or a UK context. And further to this is a good opportunity to plan for the UK's future. Whether we are part of Europe or not does not mean that we cannot contribute to its future or plan for our own. As discussed when we were putting this webinar together with Rob, this is a good opportunity to reignite some momentum in this area. We can have a think about how we can sustain a more consistent approach, whether this is having physical meetings, hosting webinars such as this, starting a mailing list of some form. This is a good starting point. Okay, so I thought a good starting point would be an update on the Europass diploma supplement. After a recent meeting in Brussels, the Council of Europe informed the Europass network that updates have been put forward and will be enacted this summer, most likely to be this month or next, if I'm not mistaken. Nothing too exciting with this really. Nothing is being nothing that's been suggested is too drastic, just some changes to the headings of the templates. So in reality, nothing of real significance other than a few cosmetic alterations. So whilst you may now be questioning why I've asked you to participate in this webinar, there is a reason for these minor changes, and this is because the real change is coming with the whole new Europass platform. Okay. So the new Europass is moving away from the standard portfolio of 5 documents and moving more towards becoming a lifelong learning platform. To give some context about this decision, the new Europass is a result of 2 decisions taken by the European Commission, one in 2016 and also one in 2018, which was enacted by decisions by EU member states, and then actually the work on creating the new platform commenced. I won't delve into the details of this too much, but it's just worth noting that these decisions mean a complete overhaul of the Europass system as it currently exists. So what is actually being proposed for the new Europass? So a summary of the Commission's approach for implementing the new Europass is organised in 4 major work strands. The first of which is going to be a Europass e-portfolio to document and manage skills and qualifications. The second of which is Europass web portal and information provision on qualifications, qualification systems, guidance information, validation, recognition, and other topics related to skills and qualifications. Third of which is Europass interoperability, the idea which is to help users find relevant information, including on jobs, learning opportunities, and how they can apply directly to those opportunities. It's the basis of building cooperation with other relevant services, such as the European Employment Service, job boards, student information systems. The list is kind of endless in terms of where it could be interoperable with. And finally, which is of most interest to us today, digital credentials. This was announced as part of the Digital Education Action Plan. And as a technical framework, it will allow organisations across Europe to issue secure digital credentials understood across Europe. It will also make non-personal information for verification credentials accessible on a blockchain. There are also a host of supporting activities that go along with this, such as the communication strategy, the maintenance of Europass, project management, and also how the framework will evolve over time. So how is this actually going to be delivered? So the new Europass can only really be delivered in close cooperation with member states and stakeholders with the European Commission. So the main body that's being tasked with assisting with this is the Europass Advisory Group, which I'm a member of. It meets about 2 to 4 times a year. And the Commission ensures alignment on strategic and policy level. Further to this, there are expert workshops, which some of those on the call may have been to. If John Bolland from Grad Intel is called in, then he has actually attended one of these workshops. And the Commission consults with stakeholders on issues relating to the implementation of specific work packages, such as the interoperability and with other tools and how to exchange information on learning opportunities. Of course, the Commission also maintains a constant dialogue with national networks, such as the network of Europass centres, Euroguidance centres, and the EQF national contact points. And of course, as many other relevant stakeholders as possible, such as those of you on this call. Each participating EU country, so that's members and non-members, such as Turkey, Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, also have representatives and aim to provide updates on the development as much as possible. So far, the communication with the Commission on this has been very good. which is quite encouraging. And they've also disseminated some very useful documents ahead of these meetings, which really fully detail how the project is moving along, what work is being currently done. And all of this information is actually publicly available on the Europass project website, which I'll give you the link to later on in this presentation, but also obviously disseminate that to everyone in an email afterwards. To make the development more efficient, the Commission is reusing existing solutions where possible. These include Connecting Europe facility, the EID, e-signature, EU login, existing standards and frameworks such as the EQF, ESCO, or the Common European Framework for Reference for Languages. So this is just to give you an idea of the timeline. As you can see, work is already commenced on this. And it's encouraging to see how ambitious the new platform is. I have my doubts whether all the functionalities will be ready by the proposed release date, but what is clear is that the new platform will be a vast improvement on what is currently available, with the scope to evolve as it moves forward. So this has really shown that there's a complete overhaul of the Europass platform. In reality, it's moving away from the portfolio 5 documents isn't disappearing, but they're becoming far more up to date with current standards, with, as I mentioned, the scope to develop as we move forward. The target date to actually launch the new Europass is February 2020. And above you can see all of the major milestones and events from the adoption of the decision until its launch. Additional improved versions will be developed and released kind of as the platform launches. But the Commission is keen to underline that this is, what is being released in 2020 is just a beginning and will hopefully evolve into something even better. So it'd be also very useful to give a quick overview of what will be delivered by when. So already we've actually had a look at some mock-up testing of the new platform, which is quite exciting. It's already much nicer to look at than the current platform. This was circulated to the Europass Advisory Group, National Europass Centres, and as many other networks as possible, which such as the Euro Guidance Network. Already a lot of the feedback has been taken on board, and I think it would even look slightly different to what is being proposed on screen. So the next step will be creation of the Europass e-profile. The idea which is, users in this test can actually populate a much fuller profile and have additional information as to what you'd be able to have, say, for instance, on a CV, where you'd obviously be limited for space. This testing hasn't actually been circulated to all of the network as of yet. I think this is just being done by some of the experts that the Commission has working on it. The next step will be a much wider end user consultation, hopefully through the help of the Europass network, and also involving stakeholders such as yourself and any other parties that may be interested. This is to be launched, I think, probably this month, this next text release, but I'm hoping to hear a bit more information about this. There's an upcoming Europass Advisory Group meeting for mid-June, so I think this was proposed to be released slightly earlier, so hopefully I'll be able to get an update on this and find out a bit more information. So this is where there's a bit more interest specifically from an HE perspective. The next test release, which is scheduled towards the end of June, is focused on delivering the first part of the infrastructure for digitally signed credentials. So there'll be functionality in here to hopefully for organizations to issue some digital credentials for users to be able to store those, share them, but also there will need to be some, some obvious some testing on this as to how it will function in reality. So the next step will focus on the framework for finding learning opportunities and job opportunities. This will be all part of the Europass portfolios, just separate tabs that you select. But as you can see, it's quite a straightforward interface that users will be able to search for job and learning opportunities. The next step is kind of the penultimate phase, which is being scheduled for around autumn time, so October, hopefully. This kind of irons out most of the functionalities that would have been tested before. Hopefully, more or less the full scope of what the new Europass will include, and users will be able to more or less use the profile more or less in its full state. There will be some beta testing events hosted by the Commission. I'm not sure on the details of those just yet, but when I have more information about those, I will, of course, let everyone know what those actually entail, whether those are actually perhaps another webinar to kind of get the word out as much as possible, or whether those are actually a physical meeting. It hasn't yet been decided, but hopefully I will find out some more information about that quite soon. So the final release, as I mentioned, is scheduled for February 2020. And this will have hopefully the full functionality and iron out any of the bugs that have gone through from the test phasing. So now that we have an idea of the overview of what the new Europass platform will actually entail, can take a much closer look at how digitally signed credentials will fit into this new context. So as described in the fourth major working strand for the new Europass platform, there'll be a Europass technical framework for digitally signed credentials, which is being called the European Digital Credentials Infrastructure, EDCI for short, which will make my next slides a bit easier. So the decision outlines the importance of authentication measures to support the verification of digital documents on skills and qualifications. So the framework will benefit users in the following ways: by offering a secure, trustworthy, and fraud-resistant system that ensures data privacy and data protection, by offering a common technical approach for issuing digitally signed credentials so that certificates from one member state can be understood and verified in another, and by supporting learners to provide evidence of their learning in electronic format to employers or education and training providers. Employers, education and training providers and other bodies will be able to check that certificates and other qualifications are valid and authentic. They can also have easy access to background information on a certificate or qualification. I think it's very important to note that this framework will not replace quality assurance, accreditation, or other private systems, but will offer technical solutions that issuers, holders, recipients of digital credentials can use. The technical framework will be built on open standards and made available for use on a voluntary basis, free of charge to users. So I think it'd be good to also outline some key functions of the EDCI. The framework will have 5 distinct functions. So primarily to identify. So learners will obviously be awarded with a credential documenting skills, competence, or qualifications by an awarding body. There'll be an element of issuing, so credentials to learners, either issued by any sort of awarding body, also could be either issued or revoked for that matter. They'll be able to be stored by the awarding body or by the individual. Credential owners will securely store credentials in a wallet, online or offline, for instance in their in a user's Europass e-portfolio. Further to this, there'll be the verification element to this also. The authenticity of a credential that has willingly been shared by a learner or job seeker with an employer or other organization. And we'll also be able to verify whether that credential has been issued by an accredited body. And further to this, you have the element of being able to share that credential with either an employer or other organizations, and credential owners will be in complete control of how this is shared and who they share this with. So just to reiterate what this framework is, it is a standardized format for digitally certifying and attesting learning, regardless of its source, in a secure way. It will be a mechanism for the credential owner to store and share records of their own learning. It will be a set of tools to enable the implementation of the standard and a facilitator for credential interoperability. What it is not is a new way of describing learning. It's entirely based on existing recognition instruments. It's a mechanism for sharing information between education institutions, for instance, mobility. It's not a mechanism for, it's not a platform for experimenting with new technology or a set of rules for institutions or member states. So within this framework, you'll be able to issue 5 different credential types. So the first of which is qualifications. So those are referred to on national qualification frameworks and reference to the QF, as well as qualification supplements such as a diploma supplement. The next level is course credentials, which includes courses offered by private organizations, training organizations, or employers. You have records of experience, which include employment experience, volunteering experience, or reference letters, where an awarding body issues a digitally signed record of experience. Next, you have certification of skills, including a formal process of assuring that an individual is qualified in terms of a particular knowledge, or for a certain profession. And finally, you have recognition statements, such as statements of comparability, recognition, or other decisions regarding qualification from credential evaluation services such as ENIC NARICS. So this will be implemented in 2 phases. Phase 1 will focus on qualifications and course credentials, and the other areas will be looked in phase 2. So that's the remaining 3, the records of experience, certification of skills, and the recognition statements. So the framework will operate with business rules, which all parties and users must adhere to as they determine the operation of the framework. The Commission, with consultation from member states, stakeholders, and experts, will work to identify the best technical solutions to make these rules function in the framework. So the current working technical solution to identify an individual, such as a credential owner or organization, such as an awarding body of any form, is linked to the EIDAS, so the Electronic Identification, Authentication and Trust Service. This regulation sets out rules for electronic identification and trust services for electronic transactions, such as the issuance of digitally signed credentials. This will obviously help identify individuals and businesses online and check the authenticity of electronic documents. A secondary identification option will be developed for credential owners who cannot provide evidence of identification. So that would potentially be a UK category, as we don't actually have an electronic ID system. But again, this is something that will be developed over time. In terms of issuance, only organisations with appropriate national accreditation may issue accredited qualifications. So the first credential type that I just went through on the previous slide. There'll also obviously be a set of rules for revocation as well. which awarding organisations must comply with. The Commission will provide an issuer tool free of charge for awarding bodies that wish to make use of it, as well as provide code and technical support for awarding bodies to integrate the issuer in their systems, meaning any technology for issuing credentials can be used in conjunction with the digitally signed credential framework, so the EDCI framework. Credential owners will have an option to store their credentials in the library in their Europass e-portfolio with built-in functionalities for easy sharing and viewing of the credential. The Europass e-portfolio library and storage of credentials will be provided free of charge to users, and code and technical support for third parties to build a library in their own systems will also be provided. Individuals will also be able to share a URL of a certificate page so a third party can view the credential. They'll be able to share the data of their credential with third-party applications also, such as so they can operate directly with job boards and also export and download a credential as a PDF, badge, or print it off in a physical format. So since I included the mention of open badges in the agenda, I just wanted to give a very brief mention of how open badges may fit into this context from an HE perspective. So in a sense, it builds up on that element of recognition of individual components of a degree which have individual value but are not necessarily formal. This builds upon some of the work that Dr. Tom Green from Accra in the US has been doing, and from what I gather, a small step in the direction of some of the work which Professor Neil Morris and Dr. Bronwyn Swinnerton have been undertaking in the unbundling project. But yeah, it's about that idea of having recognition of non-formal elements of study. So owners will control what they share. So it could be a web link or send information directly, and also for how long. The web link could stay active for 24 hours, for 2 days, for a week. The credential owner will receive clear information and instruction on sharing their credential and on maintaining that direct control over the credential. So finally, the framework will also support verification of credentials, including that the awarding body has really issued the credential is still valid, or if the credential has indeed been revoked. So all of the above checks will undergo a kind of pass or fail. And if it's a potential revocation, the check may just state unable to verify. Okay. So it's just a kind of more visual representation of how the framework can function. So you obviously have the awarding body would be able to either upload a list of credentials, to the EDCI issuing platform. Then this would issue the EDCI compliant tamper-proof digitally signed credentials being proposed on a blockchain, and then the credential would of course be issued. I mean, there's some kind of large disclaimers at the bottom of these slides to really note that as long as there's no obligation to use that issuing tool or any of the other tools for that matter. So the next step would be there's no obligation to use the EDCI wallet either. A credential owner would be able to store their credential in whatever wallet they choose or device. You wouldn't be kind of pigeonholed into using the EDCI wallet. So that of course covers the next point as well in terms of storage. So either the credential is sent to the owner directly, or the credential is deposited into their wallet, and then the credential is there kind of indefinitely and stored how the individual would choose. You then would have the next element of verification and sharing. So of course the sharing element is as we've discussed, very self-explanatory. But the verification element would kind of go in line with either having automatic verification into the wallet, which would be covered by embedded security features, which would automatically verify the credential as either being authentic or inauthentic, or it would be on the EDCI accreditation database, which automatically verifies the accreditation of an awarding body as well. So it's kind of a dual function there. It would also then cover the identity of the credential owner, and then it would kind of automatically match with the credential and the identity of the owner. So just the final area to cover is how this framework will be built. So it'll be comprised of a number of building blocks. So I already mentioned some of them, such as the EID/AS regulation and the services that are included in this. So that would include an e-signature, which you can see this is covered on the left-hand side of the slide. An e-signature to identify credential owners, an e-seal for authentication of awarding bodies and for signing credentials, an e-timestamp for obviously timestamping transactions, website authentication to secure and authenticate web-delivered data, and e-delivery to transfer credentials. The full assessment of data protection issues to ensure minimal collection and processing of strictly necessary personal data, particularly the amount of personal data collected and extent of the processing period, period of their storage and accessibility. Something to keep saying this, but the framework does support that principle of self-sovereignty, whereby the individual has complete and direct ownership of their data at all times. Try to incorporate the use of open standards as well as much as possible. And the Commission will publish all of these open standards and allow third parties to use this framework. And obviously will offer consultation on how this can be implemented also. Based on the concept as outlined above, the framework will need a number of specific services or software to ensure effective implementation. So, we'll have the issuing tool to allow an actual body to issue the credentials or store them. And store records of whether the credentials have actually been issued or revoked. A library, so that virtual wallet that we've mentioned already, for credential owners to view, store, and share their credential for verification. Accreditation information, so the EDCI framework will require a source of trustworthy information on accredited national qualifications, and also revoked qualifications, for that matter, to support verification of accreditation. And finally, a viewer tool to allow credential owners to view their credentials, for instance, on their phone or any other devices. So that pretty much covers how that framework will operate. So I think I can pass over to you, Rob, in terms of how this fits into a UK context.
Thanks very much, Lambros. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, lots of questions emerging. Good stuff. I mean, one of the things I want to say is, wow. And all by next February, did you say, Lambros? This is
yes,
deeply impressive if it happens. One of the things, just to set the context, is that when the initial scoping and investigative work for this fairly major development was underway, the UK did make a contribution to the consultation. And that was in recognition of the fact that we'd already developed the Higher Education Achievement Report. So I'm going to really focus around that sort of territory just for a couple of minutes. And I guess the key questions which might make sense for us in the UK, particularly for those familiar with it here, are, we might want to go through some of this saying, actually, we're already doing that or something very like it. And the other question, however, is, given where we are and given the focus of this work, how do we contribute to the collective effort going forwards? And I guess we'll come back to that. And also, given our somewhat unclear position in relation to the European Commission currently, what's our role in this going forwards? And that's an imponderable, and I think politics is something best kept out of on a webinar. So, Lambros, if you can put the extra bit of that slide up.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so given we've got, it seems to me that we've already got some things that, that actually work quite nicely. We've got a recognition that the here, because it is based on the current diploma supplement template, is already the UK version of the diploma supplement. So we have something in place. For most institutions, that is in digital format. It's kept in digital format. It's made available to the individual student or graduate in digital format, and it is available to be shared for the most part in digital format, either by the student through the university's own holding of the record, or through what's called a trusted third party, such as Digitally or Grad Intel, and John's just putting something in the box there, I notice. And it has some other things in it too, which will come up, because we have section 6 of the here, section 6.1, which allows for other achievements the university wants to verify. So that takes us beyond the first two boxes about the course and the educational qualifications, and it takes us into that third category about experiences, but actually experiences for the UK context designed in terms of achievement. So to having had an experience of something, bungee jumping, for example, might be an achievement if you'd be scared of witless like me, but we're couching it in terms of achievements the university wants to put its name to. And also, as that slide indicates, we're in a position where we are supporting student engagement with this record from the off, and I'll come back to an opportunity for people to engage with that topic in a minute. So I think we're in an interesting place. We have, it seems to me, in our systems for assessing and offering students credentials on achievement, some of the ingredients that this approach is interested to develop further. But also we need to think about how we're going to engage with this new context. And I think it's important to say that this is both a major initiative, but it's also peppered with the notion that people don't have to engage through a single monolithic centralized structure. There are some tools there, there's a format there, there'll be other formats in other parts of the world, and we need to think about how we're going to negotiate our way through these. So that's the context. I think we're in a good place to contribute to this. I think we've got a great deal of expertise already, but I think also we need to learn from this initiative as it takes things forwards. Lambros, do you want to pick it up at that point?
Yeah, that's more or less exactly hit the nail on the head there. It's clear that this is not being imposed as a kind of overarching framework that it's either you're in or you're out. It's very much you can choose the elements that are most relevant, and choose to kind of be interoperable in terms of either the technology that you use or the infrastructure. Whether there's just using it as a reference point for information on learning opportunities, for instance, in a careers department, or actually issuing digitally signed credentials. Institution in this framework, it'll be completely optional, really, which is good to see, and a kind of vast improvement on what is being offered before. It is really moving away from just offering those kind of standardized documents that, okay, they have value, but it's taking it to the next step, and making them far more in line with actual end user needs. So I think I can move on to the next bit, really, and how UK institutions can really be involved. So as we've said, this is an opportunity to either integrate as much as possible, as little as possible. I can assume that those of you on this call are obviously interested, at least to some extent, whether that's just to hear what's going on or actually to participate in some user testing. So there's also opportunity to contribute in terms of being interoperable, what kind of information we can offer from a either skills, learning opportunities perspective. And as Rob mentioned, we're kind of already ahead of the game in a lot of senses with this. Our framework is kind of already quite well developed. So it'd be great to hear, even from just for our own reference, not necessarily something that we need to share, but to give examples of our best practice, what has really worked with this, with our own framework, and what kind of is to be avoided or what we need to improve upon. This is either something to maybe include and discuss, and maybe in some of the questions at the end, or as an opportunity for some feedback after. But we do have quite a lot to offer this, really. So giving the link that I mentioned earlier, actually, just to kind of get a broader overview, really, of what tasks the Commission are actually doing at the moment and will be doing over the next few months. This is the Europass project website that I mentioned, which is publicly available and has access to all of the documents also that are disseminated to the Europass advisory group. You can also, of course, speak to me about anything that you're unsure of. I'll be more than happy to help you and also put you in touch with the Commission if you do want to be involved in a more formal sense. So the next step really is, with this all in mind, really is how do we plan for the future?
Lambros, before
yeah.
that bit, do we want to just take the questions that people have been lobbing into the box?
Yes. Sorry, they've been flashing up in my.
That's fine. I mean, I just worked through some of them from the topic. That's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Perhaps a health warning that if nobody knows the answer, I think Lambros said he's going to a meeting next week, and perhaps you can ask the questions there if we can't answer them today. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, right the way back. Right. So let's. Okay. There's a point from Helen, and we may have covered it because Helen's written a couple of things in. Helen, if you're going to mute your mic and you want to say anything, that would be good, because there's kind of been a strand to your comments, I think, about how this fits with what we've already got, and also how people might use it. Maybe too early to know all the answers to that, but Helen, have you got access to a mic, and do you want to say anything about your question and your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think probably that's the conclusion I've come to, that it probably is too early to answer most of my questions. And so it was reassuring to hear you say, well, yeah, the HERE does seem to be doing some of this already, quite a bit of it. So given that that's the case, if we're to adopt, if we're to kind of participate and integrate with this in a meaningful way, certainly the UK is going to have to decide for itself how it explains the relationship between the HERE and the Europass e-profile or portfolio, and in a way that doesn't feel to students of higher education institutions, for example, like a load of overlapping, or the different wallets that students have available would need to have different purposes associated with them in order for them not to just switch off perhaps from overload from all of these options.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other point about that, sorry, this is Rob, is that there are a number of different e-portfolio systems, for example, in use in UK higher education as well. So it's not only the overlap between perhaps the HERE and the DS, or the electronic DS, it's also potential student overload with e-portfolios. How many e-portfolios do you want? But that's a related, but it's the kind of same point about how we make the landscape work for students and other key stakeholders.
Unless I don't know what the prospect would be for kind of merging. If the HERE is supposed to be a form of the diploma supplement anyway, is there any way that the vision of the HERE could evolve to kind of integrate with this so that we just have one form of diploma supplement as opposed to variants of it?
Yeah.
Given that the philosophies are kind of merging.
Yeah, that sounds like it's an important point to make sure we get heard in the discussion. Is that okay for a minute, Helen?
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I would add as well that, say for instance, hypothetically, if there's a different e-portfolio platform, I think the idea is that hopefully that you could take elements of, say, the Europass platform and kind of include that. I know your question was more linked to the HERE, but in terms of how you could just take elements that are useful for a particular platform. So you could maybe have just information about jobs and learning opportunities in a kind of European context, without having to say that the onus being on the individual to have kind of different platforms to log into, which may kind of hopefully negate some of the issues that might be around, well, I'd have to upload my one document here and my other one here to have access to all these different e-portfolios. But as kind of we've already mentioned, these are still things that need to be ironed out, really. I'm not sure they've probably thought that much about to that extent of the development. But it's definitely something I can raise.
There's several questions, Lambros, here about how things will relate to other things, like the Europass Plus graduate trainees and the mobility documents. Is there going to be a quicker, simpler version of that? That may not be clear yet, given the high level at which people are working. And also integration with Student Card Initiative, Erasmus Without Paper, and actually the Bologna process as that goes forward. I guess the answer to the last one's got to be yes, but the others may not be clear at this stage.
I would say about the Student Card Initiatives, that's not entirely clear. I would imagine they will have some sort of attempt to be linked to that. In terms of the Europass mobility document, though, I think that will hopefully become a digitally signed credential as well. How that kind of interacts with the current platforms that we have, each National Europass Centre has to provide a platform. So, we host one on the NARIC website, and obviously as the other Europass centres do their own ones. It's not entirely clear how that's kind of who will be dealing with that and the role of, say, the National Europass centres in that respect. But I'm sure that the attempt is to move it towards a digitally signed credential as well, to actually have that extra element of verification to the mobility document, because currently it's just a document that's kind of signed by two parties that are sending and a hosting organization. So it'd be good to have that from an outward mobility perspective, and from obviously a higher education perspective also.
Good stuff. Okay, I'm going to move, if Helen's okay with me moving past that one. John's point is the one around here 6.1, which is great. Anything on the timeline for the technical spec, Ross?
Oh, you mean the phase 1 and phase 2 I mentioned of the digitally signed credentials?
John's got a query, John. Do you want to say anything about your query, John, if you've got access to it on Bolland?
Hi, Lambros. Hi, Rob.
Hi, John.
I was just interested in the interoperability standards. We've not seen anything published or any consultation on the standards, and was interested in if any work had been done about mapping any emerging data standards to the work that was done for the HERE technical spec, and if you had a timeline for the publication of interoperability standards.
Yeah, well, the short answer to that is no, actually. I mean, I haven't had anything more up to date really on those standards, but it's something I can press for kind of next week and the week after. So I've got a network meeting next week, and then there's actually another advisory group meeting the week after, where I'd hope we'd actually have some more information about this, because the time is kind of pressing with their current timeline. I think they're already slightly behind with a couple of elements of it already. So, and I know that you actually went to that interoperability the expert working group. So we need to get some more information about that.
Okay.
Sorry, I couldn't give a kind of a better answer to that, John, but
that's fine, Ross.
Yeah.
February 2020 is looming. Yeah.
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 I'm going to rattle down because I see 4 new messages. Thanks, John, for your point about the this DS label at Swansea. Technical standards we've talked a little bit about, I think. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Quite a lot of stuff around standards further down, a lot of which is not language I know. So ECHE annotated guidelines referencing the firm supplement or equivalent. Okay, that's good. If anybody's got a web reference to those guidelines, that would be useful to have that reference actually for another purpose.
That would be very useful, yes.
And WC3 verifiable credentials. So an opportunity for somebody who wants to contribute, which will take us in a minute to planning for the future. And
yes, I've actually I think this is David Chadwick. We spoke on the phone a couple of weeks ago, because the Commission had been in touch with him regarding that. Exactly the system that David has co-authored, the W3C verifiable credential standard. So yes, I can definitely put you in contact with them and actually participating properly, David. So it's obviously clear that you have a lot to offer to this. Anything else, Rob, you want to pick up on, or should we?
I think we move on, because that's great timing in terms of the questions that are being asked.
Yep.
And it gives you the chance just to take us forward on this slide, given that we've got about 7.5 minutes of our time.
Yeah. Okay. So this is just the final kind of wrap up in terms of our thinking and planning for the future, and how, as a UK network, we can contribute, or we can push towards our own innovation and future. So just because we may be out of the EU at some point in the near future doesn't mean we can't contribute to its future or to our own. Kind of any kind of political or organizational instability may seem like there's little to be done, but I think we'd be quite wrong to do nothing. Sorry, there we go. So we won't lose access to the initiatives and the information that's available to us. So many practices and infrastructures will still align, either because they are the standard, or the kind of nothing else exists. And also would be an opportunity for us to see how our own framework really operates within this. Of course, important to really remember how valuable our input is, and as we've already said, the HERE is kind of ahead of pretty much most things that are being proposed in this framework anyway. So in terms of planning for the future of the HERE, it's it's good to push on regardless of whatever political context we find ourselves in at the moment. So suggesting areas for progression and development are important, such as any kind of functionalities that we could include or any kind of new standards. And also just from a kind of a more basic level, really, how we engage as a network, really. What communication can we maintain between stakeholders, whether that's having some sort of face-to-face meeting, some more webinars like this, or even just quite straightforward a mailing list, just to have that background information going out, and people just to be aware of what's going on. So I think there's maybe just a final opportunity to go through some questions as well, especially, I suppose, in relation to this as well, and anything that's popped. I saw the chat window popping up a little bit.
Yeah, John's offering to help trial standards, and there's some work in the context of China, which Jane Rowley's offering. This is Rob. If I could just mention one other dimension, if you can bear to add more to the checklist, which is there's an international reference group for digital credentials that we jointly convene with Tom Green of ACRO in the States, and that group is going to meet in September. I think it's the 19th of September. To look at student engagement with digital credentials for its second meeting, on the basis that if students aren't engaged with this stuff, we're probably missing the point somewhere and somewhat. So, but I will make sure that people who've been on this call get the information about that event, probably next week. Excellent.
Okay, I can't see anything else too pressing in the chat, unless anyone else has anything to add before we close.
Lambros, do you have a sense, it's Rob, do you have a sense about where, well, actually it's for everybody. Is this important enough for people to want to be kept in touch with this? And if so, what's the low cost, low maintenance, high impact way of doing it? Goes back to your questions about webinars, mailing lists.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose due to the uncertainty with this area and our kind of ultimately our involvement, realistically, I think that this webinars such as this are the easiest way, especially when people's busy schedules and what have you. Physical meetings can be quite difficult to organise. So, and also because these are recorded and they're kind of easier to have a base point in terms of asking questions. So, I mean, my suggestion would be to do more of these as and when we have more relevant information, as because people can easily join and share this, rather than having an obligation to go somewhere physically. Obviously, it is great to do that. There are opportunities to do that as well when the time comes and is necessary. But I think these webinars are probably the best way forward, especially for the time being. And thank you, John, Helen, and Jane in the chat for confirming that. So, and Adele, thank you. Okay. Anything else there to add, Rob? Or
no, it looks like we're getting a lot of support for webinars, and I think an important recognition that people are here with slightly different agendas.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like John have a technical focus, clearly. Fiona's just talking about mobility and Erasmus without paper. So this is a broad church.
Yeah.
And people asking about the recording and also the chat. I've saved the chat, so that can be made available certainly. And the recording is with you, I think, Lambros.
Yes. Hopefully this is recorded at the same time. So if not, I will record it again. But it will be made available with the transcript of this and the slides. So no problem for everyone to have all of the information.
Okay. We're a minute early. I'm never a minute early on these things.
Yeah, we've done a pretty tight schedule. It's been quite good.
Yeah. And a final kind of affirmation of the digital format, but also building these mechanisms into student programs and relevant to students.
Mm. Exactly. Well, thank you everyone very much for joining and taking the time to listen to me today. As I said, everything will be available. I'll circulate the recording, the transcript, and the slides as quickly as possible. So yeah, great to hear so much interest in for both this format and also as engagement for the new Europass. It seems that there's plenty of interest in terms of participating with the with either user testing or testing some of the actual specific technical spec. So thank you very much, and you'll hear from me in the near future.
Thanks very much, Lambros, and thanks to everyone who participated. And yeah, some really exciting times ahead. May you live in interesting times. It's a curse, but certainly happening again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.